about the flatworms, this is the phylum Annelida. These are the segmented worms. So these are truly segmented. So what this means is that they are segmented internally and externally. They also have a true coelom. So that means they have a body cavity. They also have a complete digestive system. And some people get it kind of confused because they're round, right? But they do have bilateral symmetry when we look at them. And they do have cephalization. Those two things always go together. Okay. So if we look at the example or some examples of the annelids, this would include includes earthworms. It includes things like clamworms, which are marine. So clamworms we're going to talk about, they actually have little extensions off their body called parapodia. And then we also have things like the Christmas tree worm, all kinds of really interesting marine worms that are associated with coral reefs. But then we have tube worms. Interesting. These guys are super interesting. And then we have the tube worms, and then we have the leeches. Ooh, so leeches are an example, our first example, of an ectoparasite. They are not endoparasites. They are ectoparasites. So if we look at most of these examples, these are soft-bodied organisms. However, they are very strong. If you've ever played with an earthworm, for example, you know that they have some strength to them. So they have a very interesting skeleton, and it is called a hydrostatic skeleton. And what this is the fluid in their body cavity. So this is the fluid within the body segments. That actually creates a very strong structure. So if you think about earthworms, they burrow through soil, and in the springtime, you can sometimes see them coming up through very compact soil, and they form what are called middens. So if you see holes in your grass, in your lawn, where there's like dirt coming up, little holes, sometimes you can actually see leaves. They actually pull the leaves down in. Those are what are referred to as earthworm middens. And so that demonstrates that they can actually burrow through very compact soil. So let's look at what this might look like. So I'm going to draw a segment, and you can imagine it two-dimensionally so you can kind of see the inside. Okay. These segments, sometimes they're kind of long and skinny, and sometimes the segments can kind of be wide and fat. Okay. So we have in our segmented worm walls between the different segments internally, and these are called septae. So this is a septae, maybe multiple septae, and in there we have coelomic fluid. This is a body cavity completely lined with mesoderm, and in through this, the digestive system runs, blood vessels run, nerves run, for example, right? So we also have on the outside, we have muscles, and we have two layers of muscles. So we have muscles that are longitudinal. So we have longitudinal muscles. So when they contract, they actually cause a shortening of the segment. So this shortens the segment. And then we have circular muscles. And these tend to lengthen the segment. Interestingly, this is exactly the same way as your digestive system works. So your esophagus, for example, and your intestines, they have circular and longitudinal layers of smooth muscle. So this is very similar to the way your digestive system works, although it's not internally partitioned. So let's look at, let's use a different color, and let's look at how the muscles contract. Actually, let's use red for muscles. So let's say that, for example, my circular muscles contracted here. So it's like squeezing the segment. Notice that that segment is long. Here, my longitudinal muscles contract here, and that is going to shorten my segment. And my coelomic fluid is going to move like this. So this is the movement of the fluid. So the fluid moves like that. And this alternation of contraction and relaxation of these two different layers of muscles leads to a type of burrowing, which is called peristaltic burrowing. So this allows for peristaltic burrowing. Peri means kind of around. Staltic means like start and stop, right? And so if you ever watched an earthworm move, it like contracts and relaxes one side of its body and then the other. And it's kind of interesting because they do have little setae on their ventral surface that allows for them to cling to the soil. So you can feel those if you run your finger along the bottom of an earthworm. You should be able to feel the setae. You can't really see them very well without looking at them underneath a microscope. So we're used to looking at earthworms in North America, and what we see in North America are actually what has been introduced to this continent from European settlers. So when we look at earthworm biology, we have non-native earthworm species. So like your night crawlers, all of the earthworms that you're familiar with seeing are actually not native. But we do have some native species, and one of them is called the Phylum earthworm. So native to this area is the Phylum earthworm. And they thought they were extinct. They're a little bit larger. They are kind of pinkish in color, and supposedly they have a floral scent to them. It's kind of weird. But anyway, so these are the native ones. The Phylum, if you're not familiar with this word, is a grassland. And so if you think about going north, if you're in Pendleton, you go north up towards Moscow, Idaho, or University, Washington State, right? So if you go up there, you're going to go through these areas where they have plowed up the prairie and have planted wheat fields. And so the Phylum earthworm, when it was native, all of that land was covered in prairie, flowers, grasses, and it's very deep soil, which makes it really good for wheat. The Phylum earthworm could burrow very deeply. So its burrows were much deeper than what we have with the non-native species. So you could ask, well, what do these earthworms, like what are the benefits of earthworms? So like, why should we even care about earthworms? So we could talk about their ecological services. So ecological services or ecosystem services is a term that is used to describe, like, could we put a monetary benefit on a group of organisms? Like, what do they do to help human society? And this is important because we seem to put monetary benefit to everything. So maybe if we're like, should we spend money conserving earthworms? We could say, well, if we didn't, what would it cost us? And that might allow some people to budget money for conservation, okay? So ecological services are like, how do they benefit us? Not necessarily just the ecosystem, but us. So one of the things that they do is that they aerate compact soils. That is important for roots. Plants need a little bit of aeration. Like if the soil is too compact, nothing will grow there. And when you think about what people tend to do down at parks now, is they tend to have like this machine that actually goes through and pulls up plugs. And so if you see those plugs, what they're trying to do is artificially aerate that. That has a cost, right, that we are using instead of just having earthworms. So they aerate the compact soil. The other thing that is really interesting about them is that they help to compost. So they increase the organic material in the soil. So they compost and increase organic nutrients in the soil. So they like churn up the soil, and they actually even draw leaves and stuff down into the soil. So if they put the leaves in the soil, then that breaks down, and then you get richer soil, right? Your soil is richer because it has organic material in it. Earthworms also eat microbes, right? They eat microbes in the soil. And they excrete a nitrogenous waste. So they excrete a nitrogenous waste like urea. So this could be used by the plants instead of applying nitrogen-based fertilizer. So we could say, if I have lots of earthworms in my garden, maybe I don't have to put as much fertilizer in there because they're fertilizing the soil, specifically nitrogen. So nitrogen tends to be a limiting nutrient in soil. And so that is one other additional benefit to having earthworms around.